what chapter that stood out the most for you when you wrote this book?
Yeah. I don't remember what number, but the chapter that really centers around Joel Embiid and the top of that 2014 draft, where I really can take you from this small high school gym in Santa Monica where Joel is tearing down the rim and every single NBA team is watching him and realizing that this guy is the number one pick, to you see him in Cleveland hitting three after three after three, and he unfortunately breaks his foot, and the ramifications of that. And I could really take you through all these individual scenes at gyms from coast to coast with him and Wiggins and Jabari, and I got access to pretty much everyone, decision makers, those players. It really, I think, I think the book gets better as it moves along into it. And I think that chapter, when I first read it back, I was like, this is when we start to really, this is where we're getting into a flow, and that was the culmination of the tanking era too, right? Everyone was tanking for that 2014 draft. So to get into the nitty gritty of the processes there was pretty interesting.
While researching this book, what do you feel like the key components into tanking?
Well, I think it was a confluence of factors where we saw a rise of analytical-minded executives coming to power around the league. It wasn't just Sam Hinkie. He was obviously the poster child in Philadelphia. But, we had Rob Hennigan in Orlando and Ryan McDonough in Phoenix and Pete D'Alessandro in Sacramento and David Griffin in Cleveland at the time. And you remember the team that was running the league was the Miami Heat. And they had, LeBron, Wade, and Bosh, 3 top 5 picks from that 2003 draft, and the 14 class with Wiggins and Jabari and Embiid, like we just talked about.
Right.
They were considered at the time to be the best class since 2003. Wiggins was the next LeBron. Jabari was the next Carmelo. Joel was the next Hakeem. You even go down the list to Marcus Smart and Julius Randle and Aaron Gordon, Dante Exum. It was considered to be a 7-player draft with 7 franchise-changing talents. And I think, it just so happened to coincide with the Heat recognizing really that, to win a title in this league, you need multiple all-stars. And for a lot of teams, especially the teams running in smaller markets by these analytical-minded people, the most direct path to getting those superstars is through the draft.
Well said. Earlier you brought out the Philadelphia 76ers. Now recently they just got it kicked out of the playoffs by the Atlanta Hawks. Do you feel like overall the tanking method has worked for them? I mean, obviously the slump Ben Simmons has had, I don't feel like this is going to be long-term for him. Joel Embiid, the first 2 or 3 seasons, even battling injuries, but made it through. How do you feel like overall, has this worked for them or not?
I think, I think the part of the reason why it was called the process was that Sam Hinkie always talked about valuing process over results. And, the discourse that we're at right now in NBA media and online on social media, it's all about rings, culture, and championship or bust, right? And if you inject true serum into any smart executive, they'll tell you that their goal really isn't to win the championship. Their goal is to put themselves and to put their team in a position to have a chance, because there's so many things that happen, from injuries to infighting with your players and your coaches and agents getting involved and trying to pull strings behind the scenes, that it's really not so simple as just you build a team and you win it. You need a lot of luck as well. Like, look at obviously all the injuries playing a factor in these playoffs, right? That's a very big storyline. So you just want to put yourself in a position where you have a shot year after year after year, and you have a perennial contending opportunity. And that's what Sam Hinkie's goal was to create a team that had the backbone strong enough to be able to be in the title conversation for a decade, not for a year or two. And being that they haven't gotten out of the second round of the playoffs, you can look at that as a failure, but you can also look at it as they were 4 bounces on a Kawhi game winner away from making the conference finals, and maybe they would have won it in 2019. And obviously they lost only in Game 7 this year. Who knows? Maybe they would have taken it this year as well. So sure, they haven't necessarily gotten to the finish line, but I think they created the nucleus of a contender that's here to stay.
Where do you see this tanking process and going? Because obviously the last couple of years, you see how they kind of maneuver, how the draft lottery is now, the way how it was before then isn't the same how it is now. So where do you see it going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, well, there were a lot of conversations first in 2014 and then ultimately successfully in 2017 to reform the lottery that was definitely derived from this era that we're talking about, and particularly from Philadelphia, where now, we see the bottom three teams only have a 14% chance at the number one pick versus the worst having a 25% chance. But, look at this very season. We saw OKC and Detroit and Houston and Orlando waive players and trade them away and bench healthy guys just for the chance at getting the number one pick this year, because ironically, this 2021 class is considered to be the best class since 2014. So I don't think that the lottery reform that they passed has done anything to dissuade teams from still trying to play the lottery. And I think tanking is here to stay.
Now, you kind of probably refresh my mind. Where's like the earliest time in NBA history where tanking was showcased? Because, some people say that during the 96, 97 San Antonio Spurs season where, they kind of allegedly tanked for Tim Duncan. And obviously with the Detroit Pistons a few years earlier, they did the same thing with Grant Hill. So what are some stories around that time you can say that, hey, that franchise was doing tanking?
Yeah, I mean, look all the way back to 1984 when the Houston Rockets, they lost 16 of their last 21 games, when at that point in time, the league structure was the worst team in the West and the worst team in the East. They did a coin flip for the number one pick in the draft. And the Rockets did that the very year that there was a local product at Houston named Hakeem Olajuwon, who they really wanted to get in Houston, and it worked. And 1984 was right when David Stern took over. And as a direct response, just like Adam Silver in his very first year, 30 years later, comes in with Sam Hinkie, David Stern, his direct response his very first year was instituting the lottery. And that was when that famous frozen envelope 1985 drawing with Patrick Ewing to the Knicks. So it dates back to 1984. And from the very onset of the lottery, there's been conspiracy theories, just as intertwined with the history of the league as tanking has been. So there definitely is a pretty interesting, theme throughout the league history in that regard.
What do you want your readers to take away from this book?
I want them to take away, first, I spent a lot of time, a couple of years, like we mentioned, talking to over 300 people around the NBA, players, agents, coaches, executives. I really want people to understand that team building is really a conversation about trying to build a workplace and a culture and an organization that a reason why it's so difficult to be successful in that league, in that business, is because there are so many different individual actors at play that have their own agendas involved. And I tried to show the macro conversations that were being happening at that time through that, and also the little conversations and little details, the human elements that come into the fold as well. And I hope people, I really think there isn't a better glimpse behind the scenes of what the NBA actually is like on a day-to-day basis, inside locker rooms, on the team plane, you name it, and in this book. And I think that it's definitely an opportunity for people to get a real glimpse behind the curtain.
Well, Jake, I appreciate you doing this, man. Built to Lose, a tremendous read, man. I really recommend this book, man. Jake, tell them where they can find you.
Got it. Yeah, it's on Amazon, bookshop.org if you want to support a local bookseller, Barnes & Noble, my publisher Triumph. And yeah, I appreciate the feedback, and I appreciate anybody continuing to support and diving into those pages just like you did.